You shot hundreds of hours of footage, obviously, and took a year or 2 years just to translate all the and all that work and effort. And the film is how many minutes?
80.
80. Is that a reflection of just the feeling? You could have obviously made a 3-hour film. Is this the feeling of you don't want to overload people with tales of woe?
Well, two things. First of all,
You have other films. Yeah.
in the process, I made, I started working there about almost 10 years ago, and in the process, I made a first film,
Right.
and then a second one, which won the Emmy which won an Emmy in 2005, and um, and 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 there's a third 1 hour film. So there's three. There's a
Yes.
trilogy that's more for more interested or specialized audience. But I thought for a wider audience, to try to get to a wider audience, I thought it was important to it keep it keep it shorter. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we actually at one point we had an edit that was about 20 minutes longer, and it was a little bit indigestible
Yeah.
because it was just too much. Um, so yes, is the answer.
Because it's I'm sure it can be dispiriting to you. You've had a lot of success with these films, but it seems like, okay, if someone puts out a book, or you have the film Hotel Rwanda, or you have this documentary, then people pay attention for them. Or there's a Rwanda rapper on American Idol. I don't know if you know that. They had last week there was a kid from Rwanda who raps on American Idol as part of one of their shows about giving back. And so for a moment, people pay attention when there's some sort of pop cultural way for them to deal with it.
Sure,
Otherwise, they don't want to think about it.
sure, yeah.
That must be disheartening.
Well, I think I realize it's par for the course. I mean, but I try to find ways to make sure that these films are seen as widely as possible. But also, I think, I mean, I realized along the way that there's the record that I have, this unique document that I have, whether it be the feature length or the 3 hours or the 350 hours of footage,
Mm-hmm.
are an extraordinary resource that's gonna stay around for a long time. I mean, it's the trial the trial footage. It's just that. So I've worked in one small hillside community of about 1,000 people, and we followed the trials for 2 years, 2.5 years, something like that,
Mm-hmm.
give or take, maybe even three. I'm losing track of time. And every week we film that, so we have, we have. I mean, I have the record of the whole process in that little community, and it's an extraordinary record to have. Um, so, everything sort of helps bring attention. Both, whether it be Hotel Rwanda or the rapper
Or an article or whatever.
exactly.
The and to give people an idea, when you are speaking to some of the survivors, and they're saying this guy is down the road, he's literally. I mean, the
Well,
village
I
is.
mean, I want to say, um, you have to imagine. Um, let's imagine a suburban area in the United States. You have standard lots of what, half an acre,
Mm-hmm.
quarter acre, something like that. I'm not entirely sure. Um, that's that's how close people are. Their fields are, a quarter of an acre at most, very often. They're very small fields, and there are paths that go around the fields, and there's dispersed habitat, so there's people live, near their fields very often, and they run into each other all the time. So yes, that's exactly what it is, and it's not about running into each other in an elevator or something like that, or getting into a car. I mean, people walk
Mm-hmm.
everywhere, and so they see each other.
You actually have someone in the film who admits to taking part in personally killing, as opposed to, oh, I was there, I helped, but I didn't actually. And it seems, I know Gurovich and others have said that you can look for days, and everybody, well, maybe I pointed them in the right direction, but I didn't. Was that your experience too, by and large, that people were?
Yeah, I mean, people try to confess to as little as they can. So the gachacha basically is a system of plea bargaining. To to describe it simply, it's in exchange for confession, you get a substantial sentence reduction. Um, and so people are encouraged to confess for years before the trials actually started. And what happened is people essentially confessed to the minimum that they could, and you see it during the trials in the film. You see it. They sort of. If they're pushed into a corner, they'll confess to a little more,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
it's fascinating.
But I think it's sort of they do the minimum that they can.
It is beyond the importance of bringing it to light and showing the process and what's going on there. It is just a surreal situation.
Mm-hmm.
What is the population now, as far as I know? In the past, they wouldn't necessarily have thought as much Hutu versus Tutsi, but
I think it's the same proportions today.
So that, yeah.
Because a lot of the Tutsi who were in exile since the early '60s came back.
Yeah.
So we're talking pretty much the same proportions, which is 15% roughly. These are very rough figures. About 85% Hutu, 14% Tutsi, and 1% Twa.
Mm-hmm.
There's a third group called the
short.
Well, there.
I'm short.
But that's you know, the thing you have to remember is that people in Rwanda don't necessarily recognize each other as being from one group or another. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
They really have to know.
They really have to know, and the way people knew during the genocide to kill the Tutsi is that this was mentioned. There was a mention of the ethnic group on the identity card. If you had a card that said Tutsi, and you were stopped at a roadblock, and if you had a card that said Tutsi, they would kill you. This is in situations where people didn't know each other. There are places, the genocide didn't happen in a uniform fashion throughout the country. There are places where it was militia that came from outside that were doing a lot of the killing, or that were manning the roadblocks. There were other situations where it was really people from the area who did the killings. In that case, of course, they knew who was Hutu and Tutsi, or Twa. But I was told stories, for instance, of people who had different ID cards, businessmen. Before the genocide, they would have an ID card that said Tutsi to work in one area, and they would have an ID card that said Hutu when they were traveling in another area of the country, because
Better for business.
For business.
I'm from Sicily. You're from Sicily. Yeah.